Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Keto for Carboholics weekly live Q&A. I'm Cassie, and this is my husband, Eric.
Hello.
We've been doing the Q&A since September of last year, I think. And what we do, how it works for those of you that are new, you can submit questions in advance if you're not going to be on live, or you can ask questions live during the live Q&A. Just put your comments in the questions section and we'll make sure to get to them as quickly as possible. We also like to talk about or start off by talking about something, maybe a piece of research that we recently read addressing the ketogenic diet, or something that caught our eye in the popular news. So today Eric actually has a couple articles that he wanted to go over about keto and kidney health. Before we get going, I'll kind of give you a little bit of background for those of you that are new to our live Q&As. I am the person behind the meal plans and the recipes and all the pictures. I do the macros. I came up with the macro algorithm on my own that takes into account some of the extra things that these big online calculators just don't, just because it would just, you need someone to do it individually for each person. It's not something you could just enter in. In addition, that's it, I guess, right? That's all I do. I make up the recipes, I do the macros, and I basically help people out when they send in messages. I am not trained in healthcare, although I guess indirectly I am. I have a master's in clinical psychology and a master's in neuroscience. And then my husband is a cardiology nurse practitioner. He works in the acute setting in a hospital as well as inpatient, as well as outpatient in the office too.
Non-invasive testing, acute care, and the hospital, so long-term care setting. Not long-term care, but basically management of chronic disease of cardiac nature.
Okay.
Formerly a family nurse practitioner.
So he's going to start off by talking about some kidney articles that we recently found. When people start the keto diet, we actually get a lot of messages about people saying, I have kidney disease, I have kidney failure, I'm worried about my kidneys, someone told me keto will kill my kidneys. So here's some actual peer-reviewed medical research, and we'll make sure to give the titles for it if you want to look at it for yourself, that actually talks about the ketogenic diet and kidneys.
Yeah, so the big reason I decided to bring it up actually relates to some questions I was asked recently by fellow nurse practitioners. So when you become a nurse practitioner or a physician or a PA, oftentimes you're invited to join different associations that correspond with your scope of practice and whatnot. So I am part of the ACC, which is the American College of Cardiology, but I'm also a member of the New Hampshire Nurse Practitioner Association and the AANP, which is the American Academy of Nurse Practitioners, I believe. That's what that is. I forget. That's the
so many acronyms.
That's the credentialing board that I went through for my certification as a nurse practitioner. And so one of the things that was brought up recently in one of the discussion threads on that board by other nurse practitioners is the ketogenic diet in relation to chronic disease management, particularly, fortunately for me, cardiac disease. And then one of the nurse practitioners asked, what are the deleterious or harmful effects of the ketogenic diet when you take into consideration things like kidney disease? So I had already gone through some of the information regarding that. Cassie and I have talked about that on this page before, and what some of the problems were surrounding ketogenic diet and renal disease, and how those issues were combated through proper implementation of the diet. But they wanted some peer-reviewed research that they could look at and understand for themselves. So I just did a quick Google Scholar search, as well as I went through some of the sources that I have available at work. And Renal and Urology News, which is basically it's an outlet for nephrologists and urologists to sum some of their publications up and discuss what the literature has been showing in regards to certain health issues that have been prominent in the discussion in their field of study. So one of them looked at, and this is discussed by Grimsey Clark Connery, who has a Master's of Science as a registered dietitian, but also works in the setting of urology. This person summed up the research for presentation in this article, but also cites the original studies. And so it's called high fat, low carb diet, beneficial for CKD patients or chronic kidney disease patients. Chronic kidney disease is defined by a couple metrics, the first being glomerular filtration rate and creatinine, serum creatinine levels. Those are measurements of the actual kidney's function and ability to filter toxins through the kidney. And it's also defined by having that condition for longer than, I don't believe it's different in urology or nephrology, but most chronic conditions are at least longer than 2 weeks. Sometimes there's specifications for it to be longer than 3 months. So chronic kidney disease means they've had diminished kidney function. In most of these cases, it was more than a year, but for at least 3 months. And they looked at what is the qualifications of a low carb, high fat diet, and when applied to somebody with kidney disease, what's the outcome? So I found it interesting working in cardiology that they started by saying recent analysis have begun to find no significant association between fresh meat intake and cardiovascular events. Especially interesting because this is a renal and urology article, but that's something that working in cardiology you hear a lot. Oh, I stopped eating red meat. Oh, I stopped eating chicken with the skin. Oh, I stopped eating this, stopped eating that. When really, and this one, I believe this article was published in 2013, so even as far back as 2013, when keto wasn't really a hot topic, they were already starting to see in the literature there's no relationship between coronary artery disease and adverse cardiac events and fresh meat intake. So that's funny because in cardiology, a lot of times they'll say, oh, well, you know, reduce your fat intake, reduce your red meat intake, eat lean meats, blah, 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 when there's nothing to support that statement. Okay. And then they go on to explain that there's an increased, with an increased intake of processed meat specifically, it was seen to lead to nearly a 70% increase in cardiovascular disease mortality based on a study done by the British Medical Commission, I believe, in 2013. And so they had looked at a lot of the research that had come out of there because unfortunately in America we don't do good enough dietetic research. And so sometimes we have to source for outside of the country, and the UK is a great source for that. So they had seen that it's the processing of these foods that is causing the increased cardiovascular disease. They went on and looked at a number of meta-analyses, and that's a collection of multiple studies that are broken down, and they look at the raw data for that, looking at processed meats, protein contents, fat contents, things like that. The next very interesting point brought up in this study has to do with LDL. And a lot of people bring up concerns of, you know, what if my cholesterol goes up when I'm on this diet? Is that going to be harmful to me? So I'm going to read verbatim this quick sentence. And I'm sorry I'm dragging this out a little bit, but I find this important for people to understand. So LDL particle size is influenced by carbohydrate intake. You might be saying, well, LDL is part of your fat panel. Why is it influenced by carbohydrate intake? Well, we'll get to that. But that's an important distinction that a lot of people in the medical field don't understand. Higher carbohydrate intake increases the release of triglyceride-rich, very low density lipoproteins, also known as VLDLs, and increase your serum triglycerides. So triglycerides are part of your lipid panel as well. A higher triglyceride is generally reflective of somebody who has a higher intake of sugar-rich or carb-rich foods. So carbs that break down into sugar. They further go on to say small, dense LDL particles, or small particle LDL, are released in response to sequester triglycerides. So small particle LDLs are the cholesterol particles that are associated in some of the literature with an increased risk for adverse coronary events or heart attack. And so that distinction is important there because what this statement is saying is that increased carbohydrate intake is actually what is associated with increasing your bad cholesterol and increasing your risk for heart disease, not the intake of, not the intake of fats themselves, dietary fats. Okay, so they go on to explain that there was similar weight loss ratios between the diets that they compared. However, to see the biggest percentage of weight loss, they didn't have to actually restrict calories in the low carb group. They had to drastically reduce it in the normal carb and high carb groups, and that it would be beneficial to assess the effects of low carbohydrate, moderate to low protein, and high fat diet in people who had stage 3 and 4 kidney disease. So the limitations of the study is that they really looked at people who had stage 1 and stage 2 kidney disease, people who had chronic kidney disease, but they weren't severe. So they weren't at the tipping point of dialysis. The reason for that is because if there's risk to tip them over into needing dialysis, then you're doing harm to the patient that may be irreversible. So they don't like to study people in that population. I think stage 3 would have been beneficial, stage 4 would have been tipping that balance potentially. So that brought me to the next article that I reviewed, which was the reversal of diabetic nephropathy by a ketogenic diet. This was done in a lab-controlled study. They did use mice to simulate the study, but it's a very specific type of mouse that has a response very similar to humans when put into ketosis. Most animals are very hard to put into ketosis, and to do so, oftentimes they have to starve them. They were able to do some, I don't want to say genetic manipulation, but they were able to basically pick the specific type of mice that lined up for this type of testing, dietary studies, that would be reflective of a human population, or as close to reflective of a human population as possible. So they did a very, very well repeatable controlled trial, and what they found was that they were actually able to reverse diabetic nephropathy in type 1 diabetic mice, and partially, to a great extent, reverse diabetic nephropathy in type 2 diabetic mice. The other thing that they saw was that with the increased level of proteins, they were not seeing a harm to the kidneys, and that is something that we've discussed before, that people who have a poorly formulated ketogenic diet, where they're not actually on a ketogenic diet because they have too much protein, or they're not paying attention to micronutrients, may see some harm to their kidney function. They got to very, very high levels, and then the Lindora Clinic, who does weight loss and wellness, also studied this same thing. What happens if you put these people on high protein diets and they have kidney disease? They were not seeing an elevation or a decrease in renal function, an elevation in kidney damage, except for when these people had severely elevated protein intake in the setting of also working out very intensely and stressing their body and potentially not taking in enough fluids. So the take home for these types of studies are, there are no well-documented deleterious effects of a properly formulated ketogenic diet on the kidneys. What I mean by properly formulated is something that works with your micronutrients. So the studies that people often cite are the old neurological studies where they were not concerned with vitamins and minerals and things like that in the diet. They just wanted to drastically restrict carbs. And in these underdeveloped kidneys, because these were generally done in kids, they didn't get enough citric and phosphoric acid. When those were supplemented, their risk for renal stones, which was the concern, was reduced, if not altogether eliminated. This was seen in another trial that was done with adults, where the focus was not on epilepsy, it was done on weight reduction. They also saw a reduction in risk for renal stones, if not complete elimination of risk, by supplementing those micronutrients. So again, the big emphasis is make sure that you have a well-balanced, well-formulated ketogenic diet. You're not overdoing it on the protein. You have good high-fat intake and good sources of fat that are as minimally processed as possible. And then you're sticking to the carb allotments within the ketogenic diet spectrum and making sure you're getting your vitamins and minerals in there. So I know that was a little verbose. I appreciate everyone who stuck with that. But I think it's important because you may hear a lot. Are you going to harm your kidneys? Are you going to increase your risk for cardiovascular disease? Are you going to become fat because you're eating all this fat?
And we're going to answer some of those today in this Q&A. So we're going to get into the Q&A portion. I'm going to start with some of the questions that were submitted. If anyone has questions, go ahead and put them in the comments section. We'll try to get to as many as we can within the hour time frame. I got some right here. Okay. So let's start first with kind of giving you a brief overview of what the ketogenic diet is. So the ketogenic diet, people also call it keto or the ketosis diet, is basically a diet that its goal is to get you into ketosis. Not necessarily to lose weight, although you can lose weight on the ketogenic diet, but you can also maintain weight, and you can gain weight if you do it in a way that you want to gain weight, or some people don't do it properly and end up gaining weight because they overdo calories. But the goal of keto is to switch your body's metabolism into ketosis. So that metabolic state is when your body will use the fat in your body, the fats that you eat, to help to basically, that's your energy now. You're no longer using glucose, carbs, sugars to fuel your body. Now, one of the benefits of this is fat is much more satisfying, and it actually gives you more energy than carbs do. So generally, once you get past that keto flu or the initial keto period, when you're switching over from being, carb adapted to fat adapted, you will find that after that stage, you have more energy. And that can be attributed to multiple things. Losing weight, you get more energy that way too. But the diet is just more satisfying for most people. Now, the ketogenic diet is not, and people will say there are various forms of the ketogenic diet, but the ketogenic diet is a clinically based diet. And I say that because it has been researched, and there are certain metrics you need to hit for a ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is a very low carb diet, so generally that means you're at 20 grams of carbs or less, although some can have more. It's a moderately low protein diet. So this is not an Atkins diet or a low carb diet where you can have as much meat as you want. It is a moderately low protein diet. And finally, it's a high fat diet. Now, when I say high fat and low protein, this is relative to your caloric intake. Depending on what your goals are, whether you want to lose weight, gain weight, build muscle, that will affect your macros. And your macros are basically a breakdown of your calories. So someone that wants to lose weight needs a caloric deficit.
And real quick to interject, in terms of the high fat statement, that just means that in terms of your calorie intake, 60 to about 80%, depending on how your macronutrients are broken up. And if you're looking at percentages rather than the actual numbers, about 60 to 80% comes from fat, rather than what most people do, which is around 60% coming from carbohydrates, which is ridiculous.
And if you look back at your diet pre-keto, you may find that you're actually getting in more fat than you are on the ketogenic diet, just because your calories were higher, the foods you were having. I mean, if you look at...
So the percentage of your diet may have been that you were having a higher percentage of carbs, but if you look at the actual grams, you were likely having just as many grams of fat as you were prior to being on the ketogenic diet, unless you were specifically on a low-fat diet. But percentage-wise, that tends to flip, because now you're going to watch your calorie intake, you're going to drastically reduce your carbohydrate intake, and then that has to be exchanged for something, right? The calories that you are having have to come from somewhere, and ideally they would come from fat. A moderate amount of them would come from protein, and as minimal as possible come from carbohydrate.
So if you're looking to lose weight, like I was saying, you need a caloric deficit. Now, your caloric deficit, once you figure out what it is, and most calculators will do it for you, or you can calculate it yourself, then you also need to take into account your body fat percentage. This is huge. When people are using these calculators online, some of them don't take into account body fat percentage, and some people guess what their body fat percentage is. You want to be as accurate as possible. If you have access to calipers at your gym or through your healthcare provider, that's what I would use. If not, there are websites where you can put in the measurements of your body, and then it'll give you your body fat percentage. You want to be as accurate as possible, because your body fat percentage is going to give you kind of a rough estimate of how much muscle is making up, or how much fat is making up your weight.
Or if you're loaded, you can do a DEXA scan.
Yes.
That works too.
So you need to know where you're at so that you can know how much protein you need, because you do need protein on this diet. It helps you to maintain the muscle you already have, and if you're looking to build muscle, it helps you to build the muscle as well. You don't want to have too much protein. Too much protein will hold you back weight loss wise and ketosis wise. You do need to get a perfect balance. So when I was saying this is a clinically based diet, it's not just about percentages. Some people will stick to a specific set of percentages for them, and it may not work for them because of their body type. People with endocrine disorders, people with insulin resistance.
That is an endocrine
Well,
disorder.
I guess,
So
sorry.
people with endocrine disorders or other disorders that may slow down your metabolism or increase your risk for insulin resistance tend to lose weight slower and tend to need a different balance of macronutrients.
Generally, they need less protein and less calories than your average person would. So you need to take in a bunch of different factors that you might not be thinking of when you use some of these online calculators that just set it at a standard percentage for everyone. Also know that men have different needs than women do. And again, that will be taken into account when you put in your body fat percentage.
And men's body fat percentage is drastically different, because a man at about 12% body fat may look, pretty lean, but not the leanest you've ever seen. And a woman at 12% will look like, holy crap, I don't think she has an ounce of fat on her. So it's very, very different when you compare the two, and that's an important distinction if you're trying to use like a comparative photograph. Okay, so that person or these people are at about 32% body fat. I think I'm pretty close to that based on X, Y, Z. But you have to be brutally honest with yourself, particularly if you're going to try to use the photo method. Like, this is where this person carries their fat. This is where I carry my fat. I'm most similar to this weight range. You have to overestimate a little bit because pictures aren't the most accurate.
So once you know what your macros are, say you're using a calculator, I like Rule.me online. So if you Google Rule.me macro calculator, you could use that. So once you put it in, you also have to put in your activity level. This is big. People overestimate their activity more frequently than not. For the majority of people in today's, like, I don't know, the standard, the US, we're pretty much sedentary. There are people that do work out, obviously, but most people are sedentary. It's not bad. No one's going to see that and judge you. Put what you actually are. If you're going for a walk around the block once or twice a day, that doesn't constitute light exercise.
If you're going for a jog routinely and you know that it's elevating your heart rate to around 85% of your predicted maximum heart rate, that's different. You know, you're maintaining 30 minutes of elevated heart rate, that counts as exercise. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a walk for 30 minutes and your heart rate never goes above, 60% or 70% of your age predicted maximum, then it's really not exercise. It's not cardiovascularly strenuous, and it's not increasing your caloric burn by enough to consider exercise.
You would be better off underestimating to start and then adjusting as needed than to overestimate. Because overestimating on your protein and on your calories can cause you to gain weight if you're not using that through exercise.
And minimally, it will cause you to stall your weight loss or reduce your weight loss. So everybody who switches to this type of diet, almost everybody, will lose some weight at the beginning just by eliminating the massive amount of carbohydrates we typically take in. However, if done correctly, you may see a better reduction in weight, specifically in excess body fat rather than just lean body mass and fluid, and it will tend not to plateau so quickly if you're doing it correctly.
So now once you know what your macros are, you've put in the calculator, you got your macros, what do you do now? Now you need to plan your day to make sure you're eating within those macros. You can use Carb Manager, you can use Senza, MyFitnessPal. I use MyFitnessPal. And you want to track everything you eat. My biggest tip for everyone on keto is to track before, at least the night before, if not a couple days out. Because it's so much easier to adjust your day before you've eaten anything than to adjust it after you've eaten something. Say you didn't realize how much protein was in something and you had your whole day's protein at lunchtime. Now you have no protein for the rest of the day, and all you can have is a bowl of olives for dinner. It's best
to put it, but not very satiating.
It's best to put it in advance. I always put my dinner, my breakfast, and my dessert in. And then my lunch is always a salad, because salads are so easy to customize to hit your macros. If you need more fat for the day, you can add cheeses, dressing, avocado. If you need more protein, you can add nuts, eggs, bacon, chicken, any type of meat. It is just so much easier to manipulate your macros by using a salad, because it can be as light or as beefy as you need it to be. So that's the next step with macros. I think that's the hardest part for keto for people after they find out what their macros are, is to stick with them and eat within them. Try to also separate, and this is another thing that I recommend, is separate your protein into 3 meals. You don't want to have all of your protein at once, and that will also make it easier for you to choose what you're going to have for the day. If you're going to have a heavier protein at dinner, then you're not going to want to have a very heavy breakfast or lunch with protein in it. So that's with macros. I think I kind of, beat that horse, but if people have more questions about it, feel free to ask. I'm gonna jump into the next question that I got. How important is it that you meet your fat macro goal? I cannot get enough fat in without going over on protein. Protein is everywhere. Tips on how to increase fat without protein. So fat is one of your most important macros, if not the most important macro on the ketogenic diet. And someone actually will ask this question later on, but I might as well lead into it now. People always say, if I want to burn the fat in my body, then I shouldn't eat fat. And that is probably one of the biggest misconceptions about keto. People think, well, it is a high fat diet, but I've got a lot of fat on my body, so I don't have to eat fat. And that's just not true. It is metabolically it is metabolically wrong. It's not true. There's no research to support that. There was someone that kind of talked about it, but his words were twisted, basically.
They're a little misleading. The way it was, the verbiage he used made it a little bit misleading. And so really what's happening is you're trying to train your body to use fats, okay? So if you're trying to train your body to use fats, you need to give it fat to burn off, and you need to deprive it of other things, other sources of energy. Obviously, the most obvious thing you want to deprive it of is glucose or carbohydrates in any form except for dietary fiber. Because when it has that, it views it, we're all pretty much carb adapted just because of how we've been eating for years. So when you take in carbs, your body's going to want to use that primarily for energy. When you take in protein, in the absence of carbohydrates, your body is able to actually convert it into glucose through a process called glyconeogenesis. And so it actually breaks down non-carb sources, such as protein, and converts them into glucose or glycogen to be able to be utilized as a source of energy in place of glucose. So you're still technically carb adapted if you're doing that, because your body's turning it into a carb to be able to be utilized that way. Fat, however, is much more difficult, particularly in humans, for your body to adapt fat into glucose. So your body will, once you're depriving it of glucose and you're not overdoing it on the protein, it has to say, okay, well, I need another source of energy. So you're training it to look for something else, and that is fats. And it starts to burn fats indiscriminately. That's the fats that you're eating. That's the fats that you have stored in terms of adipose tissue, so belly fat, back fat, whatever. And then the fats that you're generating, and so that's your cholesterol. So many people will see long-term a reduction in their cholesterol associated with your body utilizing fat as its primary energy source. And so that's important when you start to get into the discussion about what about risks for chronic diseases like coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, things like that. So we don't give medical advice. I'm not trying to say that any of this constitutes medical advice or will be specifically relevant to you, because I don't know anybody's health background that we're talking to here. However, that's what the literature shows. And by depriving yourself of fats, you'll never become fat adapted. You may be low carb. You may be even able to border on ketotic if you start measuring your blood ketone levels. However, that is not the proper way to do the ketogenic diet, and you likely will never enter optimal ketosis if you're doing it that way, if you're doing too much protein or too much carbs.
All right. How do you count macros with recipes you make? So with that, you can use pretty much any of the apps that are out there. I like MyFitnessPal. You can go in and create a recipe. You insert every ingredient. You can do it by either scanning the barcode of the products you're using, or you can type them in and search for them.
Painstakingly, every single ingredient.
Every recipe I share, it takes me almost as long to cook, almost as long to figure out the macros and enter it all in as it does to cook it.
I think longer sometimes.
So you enter in all of your ingredients, then you put the amount of servings, and then it'll give you out the macros. Now people wonder, how do I know how many servings? Generally, you can play with that. So you're going to figure out your macros before you eat the food, ideally. So you would put all your macros in, figure out what the total macros are for the recipe.
You put all your ingredients in.
All your ingredients in. And then you will see, okay, well, if I have 8 servings out of this, that means it's going to be this much, and that's a little too high for calories for me. All right, let me make more servings, 10 servings. And then after that, you would weigh your total recipe minus the dish it's in, and then divide it by the amount of servings, and that's the weight of each portion.
So you have to pre-weigh the dish, of course, to zero out your scales so that you can then do it with the food in it.
Mm-hmm. And that's how you do it. It's pretty simple to figure out your macros. It's just kind of painstaking.
It's time consuming.
Yep.
All good things take time.
How can I get myself into deeper ketosis? Does one meal a day and longer fasts help? So deeper.
Not for somebody new to ketosis. Don't do that.
So fasts have a place in everything, but a fast, you don't have to fast to do keto. You can do keto without ever fasting. Some people do intermittent fasting, and that helps with their ketone levels. Other people, it doesn't. It is a personal thing. But when you're first starting off on the ketogenic diet, I don't recommend fasting. I recommend waiting, 2 to 3 months before adding in any fasting, whether it's intermittent or longer period fasting. I also am not a 1 meal a day fan. Having all your macros in one period will cause a blood glucose spike and then an insulin response. Even if you are eating all keto foods, if I were to eat my macros, the same foods throughout the day versus having them all at once and take my levels before and after, I would be much higher on my ketosis levels and lower on my blood glucose having them spread out than all at once. Now that doesn't mean that 1 meal a day people cannot be in ketosis. Now you're gonna have 23 hours or 24 or 22 hours before you eat again. That's plenty of time to fast your body to get back into ketosis. Generally, 6 or 8 hours after that meal, they should be back into ketosis and then just getting higher and higher.
Some people are back in it within about 2 hours.
It really depends on what the one meal is that they're eating, the types of carbs and things like that. That kind of actually brings me to a point today. I saw someone on Instagram has quite a bit of followers, I think like 20,000 followers. And she was giving advice to her followers on the ketogenic diet. I got tagged in it, so I was kind of reading through. And one woman asked, I really love sugar cubes in my tea. How many sugar cubes can I have and still remain in ketosis? And the person had said, well, sugar cubes are about 3 grams of carbs per cube. You can go ahead and put a few in because you have 20 grams of carbs a day, so you can use them. But that's not how this works. It's not like a bank and you have $20 and you can take it out and use it all at once. You don't want to use it. That's your limit. 20 grams is your limit. It's not, try to get to 20. It's not a goal. And then you also want to choose foods that have a lower glycemic index. You want to basically, the goal is to not have an insulin response. Your body, insulin is a growth hormone.
And for all intents and purposes, this is a sugar-free diet. And what I mean by that really is, or at least a no sugar added diet. What I mean by that is you're not trying to ingest literal sugar. Your carbs should be coming from things that have a low glycemic profile so that any sugar that's naturally occurring in that food is very, very slowly released, so slowly released in fact that the body is likely to burn it up before it has a chance to store it. Otherwise, you're not going to enter optimal nutritional ketosis and you're likely to stall weight loss, if not put on weight, because that sugar is likely to be stored as adipose tissue. That happens within 15 minutes of ingesting the food. So unless you're working out after having that sugary tea, you will store that sugar.
And personally, for 3 grams, I would rather have a vegetable. It's going to fill me up more. I'm going to get some micronutrients in.
It's going to help with digestion.
It will help you with your overall goal to get in ketosis, lose weight, whatever you want to do, versus having sugar or bread. Some people say, I can have a slice of bread a day because,
it's 11 grams of carbs.
But that's just, the people that are looking at that, they might want to look for a different type of diet, right. Maybe Mediterranean or low carb or something like that,
paleo,
but not keto. You don't want to be trying to find all the loopholes because that's when you start to stall. That's when you don't get into ketosis, and that's when you don't lose weight.
And that's when it gets really frustrating because you think, why am I giving up all this stuff if I'm not losing weight and I'm not getting these extra health benefits of being on this type of diet? Because you're not really giving up the things you're supposed to give up. So.
All right, someone asks, I have a nut and almond allergy. Any alternatives to butters and flours for baking? So for butters,
that shouldn't be affected by nut and almond.
What was that?
It shouldn't be affected by nut and almond. If you have a nut and almond allergy, you should be able to have any butter. I
think they mean nut butters, like peanut butter, almond butter.
Okay.
So there is one, I think it's called tahini. It's a sesame seed butter. That some people that are allergic to nuts can have, and that's a good one. It's more savory. You can also do.
Hold on, Nicole Marie says ghee. I don't think she's. I made the same mistake. I don't think she's talking about that type of butter, Nicole.
I think she's talking about nut butters. And then as far as flours, you can use coconut flour or ground flax. You can even use psyllium husk to help bulk things up as well.
And most people with a nut allergy are not actually allergic to coconut, so just be sure. You may want to visit an allergist and have your specific allergies tested so that you can determine, is it just tree nuts, is it peanuts, does it include coconuts? It's better to be safe than sorry with those types of things, particularly with nut allergies tend to be more severe.
Someone had asked about the fat. Should I stop eating fat so I can burn my fat?
No.
We answered that already. I calculate my macros and I've gained weight eating too much fat. So should I lower fat and increase what? Protein?
You didn't gain weight because you ate too much fat. You likely gained weight because your macros were not properly calculated.
Probably too many calories.
It may be the specific macro calculator you're using, or it could be that you estimated something incorrectly. Either your body fat percentage, you accidentally put in your height or weight wrong because it...
Someone actually sent me a screenshot of it, and they put themselves in at 8'5", and they meant to put 5'8".
Yeah.
So that was a big difference in her macros.
It's easy to make mistakes on this. And in fact, I had somebody, a family friend, send me their breakdown, and they're like, well, I'm only allowed to have like 1 gram of protein. How is that a thing? And I'm not able to have like any calories. And I said, well, you put something in wrong. That can't be true, because that's way too little. Like, nobody can survive.
What did you put in for body fat percentage?
Well, 100%. It calculated at 100%. And I said, think about what you're telling me. If you're 100% body fat, 100%, that means you don't even have bones. You don't even have organs. You don't even have skin. You are just fat. That's what 100% body fat means. And they said, oh, well, that makes sense. I must have calculated something wrong. And indeed they did. So they went back and adjusted it. Macronutrient requirement was much more realistic.
So if you've been doing keto for a while, and I get, this is probably one of the most common questions I get. I've been doing keto and I lost a little bit of weight, now I've stalled, or I've gained weight. And that is 90% of the time because their macros are not correct. They're having too many calories or too much protein.
Maybe they didn't adjust after they did lose initial weight.
So you can always message me and I can help you with your macros. I don't ever charge anyone for it, but you just have to know I get lots of requests for macros, like 1,000 a week. And so it does take me some time to get to them. About 2 weeks is my turnaround time to help people with macros. But I need your age, your height, your weight, your activity level. Be specific.
Your gender.
And your body fat percentage. Not your BMI, your body fat percentage. It's very different. And then also, if you have any endocrine disorders, it's helpful for me to know, not because I'm going to be treating them, but because it does have a metabolic effect. So, next question. Can you talk about exercising while beginning keto? I'm 3 weeks in with keto and have no energy to run. I'm training for a marathon and cannot run a mile anymore. I should be running 10 to 12 right now. People tell me energy comes back with keto, but when? So
generally, energy ends up increasing on keto.
So I would say that maybe your macros are not right. If you are trying to exercise, you do need to make sure you're getting enough calories, enough protein in for your activity level. Keto is actually used a lot for people that do ultra running, so more than a marathon. So it is common to be able to exercise intensely on the ketogenic diet. So you want to make sure you're getting in enough fat for your energy. You want to make sure that you're getting enough protein and enough calories. When I do exercise, and it's not very consistently, I do make sure to have something before I exercise. So generally it'll be like almond milk with some spinach and something to flavor it, and some MCT oil, just to get in some fats before I exercise, because fats are fuel. And then I don't feel sick, or I don't feel, tired while I exercise. Versus if I didn't do that, I might be a little more tired, or I might not be able to push as hard as I can with the fats. And that's why some people do pre-workout or post-workout types of drinks. I'm cheap, I don't like to spend my money on those things. Almond milk, spinach, and MCT oil works fine for me, and then I'll put like chocolate in it, or cocoa powder, or something like that.
A ketogenic chocolate mix, yeah.
Someone also asked, when you add exercise, does it matter what your ketone levels are? Does higher level of ketones help with stamina or energy levels? So higher levels of ketones, and this is actually kind of confusing for some people. They think a higher level will constitute more fat loss, and that's just not true. There's no research to support it. Once you're in ketosis, so 0.5 and higher, you are going to be in the fat burning phase. And the higher you get, the more benefits you'll get. Generally, when you get 3+, you're in the therapeutic benefits. Optimal ketosis is 1 to 3 though. Exercise does affect ketosis. It does depend on what type of exercise you're doing, because it can lower or boost your ketones depending on the type of exercise, aerobic or anaerobic.
If your question is surrounding, will you have a better exercise tolerance with a higher ketone level? Potentially. If you have higher levels of ketones in the body, that means you have higher levels of what is going to be utilized as energy in the body. So it stands to reason, and this is where the awful companies that try to scam people into getting keto shakes and proprietary
exogenous ketones.
Yeah. This is where they make their money, is because endurance athletics has shown to be the sole place where those may be beneficial. Well, I say may pretty strongly. It may be beneficial because
not for that price, in my opinion. Sorry.
It has nothing to do with price. This is a biological discussion. So
I don't think it's worth it, is what I'm saying.
But this is science. So regardless of whether you think it's worth it.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying there are other ways to get it.
So back to the discussion. The higher level of ketones is akin to the people who pop a glucose tab when they run out of glucose because they've been running for so long. So people who are carb adapted and they take in glucose during a race or during a triathlon or whatever. It's the same as that, except if you're starting with the higher level, you have more from the get-go to burn off. It burns longer, it burns cleaner, and it fuels you better for those types of endurance athletics. Again, this is where those types of companies have some merit to market themselves, because if you have these extra levels of ketones during an endurance, a prolonged state of athletic performance, okay, you may have some benefits. Sorry, somebody's trying to call and interrupting this feed. However, for the very vast majority of people, you're better off trying to get into nutritional ketosis and maintaining nutritional ketosis without exogenous ketones. To Cassie's point.
Yes, what I was getting at is you can do it without spending the money on that.
Yes,
you could
and
do
I agree
something.
with that 100%. I would never spend the money on it.
You could have coconut oil. They have little packets of coconut oil you can take if you're doing an ultra run. They have almond butters. They have all different things that you can do other than these expensive proprietary blends of exogenous ketones. That's basically what I was getting at, because I personally don't think they're worth the money. I think they prey on people by telling them that it'll increase their weight loss. It'll, they can have that hamburger and french fries and be back into ketosis in 60 minutes, and that's just not true.
And I agree with Cassie on all that, but for the sake of the scientific discussion, higher levels of ketones in the bloodstream during the time of exercise may increase performance, but I'm always for get it directly from the source, and you making it is better, particularly because you're going to burn more fat that way. I'm just going to answer this one question real quick before we continue with the pre-submitted questions. Cassie, what probiotics would you recommend for making your yogurt recipe? I've seen all sorts when shopping for them. I'm just going to say a probiotic, while it's more of a supplement than a medication, it does border on medical advice if you're asking which ones to use. We do not offer medical advice. However, Cassie tends to use Culturelle, I think, or Align, or the generic version of it. You just want a capsule that you can open up for the powder to mix in the yogurt, that's all. And capsules that contain a higher concentration of lactobacillus tend to be better researched and better for gut health. However, we're not recommending any specific probiotic to you because that's sort of beyond... That's just what I use to make my yogurt. Yeah. Hope that helps. Someone asks, is it important to count your macros or just watch your carbs? That's what, like we said earlier, that's one of the defining characteristics of keto versus low carb in Atkins, is that we do have to maintain specific macros. It's not just all about staying low carb. You have to take into account your calories, whether you want to gain weight, stay the same, or lose weight. Your protein, your fats. You do need to take all those into account. So you do need to count your macros. That's very important. Another defining factor, just for people who aren't really familiar and often confuse the ketogenic diet with the Atkins diet, another defining factor is on the Atkins diet, you typically start at a threshold of 20 grams of net carbohydrates. Some people do total carbs too. And then you work your way up to about 60 during the maintenance phase. So on the ketogenic diet, you never work your way up to 60. Some people find that they're able to maintain nutritional ketosis around the 50 or less mark, but it's not a goal to be able to maintain and work your way up to a higher level of carbohydrate. This is meant to be a long-term, very low carbohydrate, which is defined at, I believe the definition for very low carbohydrate is 30 or less, but in the ketogenic community, it's defined as 20 grams of net carbs or less per day with moderate to low protein and high fat percentage. So that's one of the other differences. So let's see. We already answered that. Not Natalie. So Natalie wants to know, is keto safe during pregnancy? I've been wanting to research this and haven't had the chance. So pregnant women, children,
These are
at-risk populations that are unethical to study.
It's very rare that you'll find any studies on them.
And when you do the retrospective studies, meaning we were able to observe this person was eating a certain way, taking a certain medication, doing a certain thing during pregnancy. We didn't ask them to. We didn't have a specific control group to compare them against. We just used this population that was doing this one thing and studied them, what their outcomes were by looking back at the data, not by collecting it during, and compared it to this population who was doing something different, again, by looking back at the data. So there's no control in that. It makes it sort of a weak study.
Now, if you've already been on the ketogenic diet for an extended period of time, it's generally safe to continue. Just make sure that you're monitoring your weight with your OBGYN and letting them know what type of diet you're on. It's best to bring in kind of a meal plan or a diary log to show them what types of foods you're eating. Some people, when they hear keto, they think it's all meat, butter, and fat, and that's just not true. There's lots of veggies in it.
They instantly will say, no, you can't do this while you're pregnant. And there's many that will argue that it's more harmful, if you've been eating this way for a prolonged period of time, it would be more harmful for you to drastically switch your diet during pregnancy than it would for you to be maintaining on the same type of diet you are on. But you should not be looking to lose weight during pregnancy. So
unless you're morbidly obese, in which case your doctor may want you not to gain weight.
So you wouldn't be losing weight.
Well, you can lose weight.
We'll leave that to the suggestion of your monitoring OBGYN or high-risk pregnancy specialist.
But you always want to talk to them. Pregnancy is something that you do want to monitor the whole time. You would want to adjust your macros to maintain weight at the very most. And for those of you that are starting at a normal weight, you'd still want to put on weight during pregnancy, and you would go by the recommendation of your doctor.
So anyone who tells you that it's harmful, they make a blanket statement, ketogenic diet is harmful during pregnancy, there is just as little, if not less, research for them to make that statement and have it supported by research as there is to say it is healthy during pregnancy. It's just not something that's studied. It's not ethical. So.
Same with breastfeeding. I exclusively breastfed on the ketogenic diet with my son, and I had no problems. It didn't drop my supply. Some people say that it would affect their supply. They wouldn't be able to breastfeed. You need carbs to give your baby carbs so they can be healthy. And I've had no problems with breastfeeding. Other people that have done, my meal plans or have reached out to me for help with macros that have been exclusively breastfeeding haven't had issues. It's all about making sure you're bringing in the proper nutrition and adequately hydrated, which is big when you're breastfeeding.
And you don't need carbs to generate carbs in the breast milk. Lactose is the os comes from glucose. It's a form of carbohydrate. It's a form of sugar that is naturally generated by the body. And guess what? Glycogen, which is the stored form of sugar, is in every single adipose cell you have, every fat cell. You've got it there, and nobody's at a 0% body fat percentage. So even during breastfeeding, it would be erroneous to say that you need carbs to generate carbs for breast milk production, biologically speaking.
All right, Amy, I'd like to make it through a workout without passing out or giving up.
Me too.
I would recommend doing something, if you have the ketology powder or MCT powder, like a chocolate powder, mixing that with some almond milk, a little MCT oil, and some spinach, because spinach is awesome. Blend that up. Yep, blend that up with some ice and have that right before working out. That might help you. But give that a try and just slowly work your way up to it. If you haven't been working out, don't try to go in and do something crazy. Work yourself up.
Because every time I've done that, I've thrown up. It's not fun. And make sure you have an electrolyte drink too. You get more rapidly depleted on electrolytes because this is a naturally diuretic diet, meaning you tend to excrete more extra fluids that your body's been holding on to, which is why you do lose water weight pretty quickly. With that goes some of your electrolytes like potassium and sodium.
Once I'm at goal weight, how do I continue this way of eating without losing more weight? So I've been at goal since the fall, and I've been maintaining weight since then. You adjust your macros, you get more calories, and the calories get split between protein and fat, so you get an increase there. Your carbs stay the same. It's actually fairly easy, and I feel it's very enjoyable once you get into maintenance mode because you do have a lot more options. You can have some bigger portions. There are more options out there for you. But it's absolutely possible to maintain your weight on keto. I've been doing it for longer than it took me to lose weight, actually. And it's enjoyable. Another question I got. How important is it to balance electrolytes while doing keto, specifically sodium? And have you known of anyone with congestive heart failure that was able to do keto and help their condition? So electrolytes is very important on the ketogenic diet. Many people that are experiencing keto fluids because of an electrolyte imbalance. They're not getting enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium, as well as not enough water. So you want to make sure that you're eating foods that are rich in those things. You don't need to have reduced sodium products anymore when you're on the ketogenic diet because you're not buying processed foods. You're most likely getting less sodium on the ketogenic diet than you were pre-keto.
And it's an anti-diuretic diet.
So you want to have plenty of spinach, avocado, nuts. Pumpkin seeds are actually great. You'll want to, some people do supplement with potassium, magnesium. You could talk to your healthcare provider about that, about what type of dosing you should do. Some people do electrolyte powders in their water. There's one that you can get at Whole Foods and Amazon called Ultima. It's pretty inexpensive. You can add it to your water and that'll help you with your electrolytes, but it is very important, especially when it comes to cardiac, making sure your electrolytes are proper, right?
Well balanced, yes.
Well balanced, proper.
Yeah, so your electrolytes actually innervate the entire basically electrical conduction through the heart. So you have all these different channels, sodium channels, calcium channels, potassium channels that go through the heart, and all of those innervate the process of electrical conduction through the heart. However, specific to heart failure, this diet has been studied in the setting of heart failure and improving your LVEF, or left ventricular ejection fraction. That's one of the measurements used, although some people do have a preserved ejection fraction with heart failure or cardiomyopathies. That's something that has been studied in terms of, do people have an improvement when on the ketogenic diet? For a number of reasons, it has been observed that people do have an improvement. And again, we don't offer medical advice. I'm not saying that this is going to improve if you have congestive heart failure, that it's going to improve yours. But from a biological standpoint, and physiological standpoint, the reasons this works for many people is because, as I've already said, it's a naturally diuretic diet. What's the number one thing we tend to put people on for congestive heart failure? Diuretics. We want to get off that extra fluid so your body's not overloaded, can pump more effectively. What's another thing we tend to do? Tell you to restrict salt. Well, you're naturally diuresing out some of the salt, and your body isn't retaining salt intracellularly when you're on a ketogenic diet. And this intracellular and intravascular balance of sodium is better, okay? Likewise, you're reducing inflammation, and most people see a reduction in an excess of cortisol responses, which worsens congestive heart failure, and the reduction in weight and vascular resistance brought on by weight loss and brought on by the use of the ketogenic diet in general tends to help people in terms of blood pressure control and outcomes related to congestive heart failure. So has it been used to improve people's congestive heart failure, and is it reasonable to assume that this might be a feasible addition to your treatment of your congestive heart failure? Yes, yeah, it's definitely reasonable. Should you talk to your managing physician or advanced provider about that? Absolutely. Whoever's managing your congestive heart failure should be in on the discussion as to what you're doing to try to improve it.
All right. I've been keto for almost 3 years, but I always struggle when I get sick, particularly when I get the stomach flu or nausea. I want to go straight for saltine. Suggestions. We actually were struck with the GI bug like a week or so ago.
Our entire family.
It was horrific.
Us, the kids. It was awful.
It was horrible.
Probably the dog.
It was insane. And again, we actually stayed keto.
We got saltines for the kids because they needed to just get something in that was going to calm down their stomach, and we don't make them eat ketogenic. We don't have them eat unhealthy and try to teach our daughter to make healthy choices, but we don't specifically make her eat ketogenic.
So I would do I have a recipe on my Instagram, like a minute English muffin. I would make that and put a little butter on it, and that should help because it's like having some, plain toast. You could do flax crackers if you want crackers, but I don't think that'll do the same as saltine.
Electrolyte drinks are key.
Like Powerade Zero, or if you have electrolyte powder to mix in. Just do your best, and if you need to take medication that's going to kick you out of ketosis, don't worry about it. You need to get better. It's only going to be a brief period of time that you're sick.
Yeah.
So
if you have the flu, or you're drastically vomiting, or have diarrhea, or things like that, things that are depleting your electrolytes and could potentially be very harmful to you, it's more important that you get better than you continue to lose weight. You'll lose plenty of water weight when you have diarrhea and vomiting.
Yes.
So please, in the setting of that, don't let your focus be maintaining nutritional ketosis. Have your focus be getting better, and you can always get back into it afterwards. But that's what we did to get through it. We made sure we had plenty of electrolytes, because I started having, in fact, I think at some point we'll probably post a video, I recorded my calf muscle spasming just severely. You could see it doing the wave.
I told him to drink electrolytes. I even bought it for him in the middle of the night.
Because I was having such a hard time keeping down anything. I just felt so nauseous. And so once I started to supplement my electrolytes again, immediately it stopped. But I couldn't even stand up because my legs were spasming so bad.
Do you add MCT oil to the keto powder? Does that have MCT powder have it in it already? It does have it in it. Sometimes I'll add more for extra fats, but if you're using maybe a flavored powder that doesn't have MCT oil, I would add MCT oil to it. What do you think about taking BCAA after a workout? I know there are a lot of people that do it whether they're keto or not. I personally don't believe you need it. It's like a post-workout type of drink.
What's in it?
It depends on the brand. Hold on, I'll pull up this one that's keto friendly.
I don't look into these like extra supplemental things because my mindset is if you can get it from your natural, like your regular diet, get it from your regular diet.
So this is one that a lot of people take.
It
has zero carbs in it.
Okay. The other problem with a lot of these supplements, I don't know if it's true for all of them, but most of them are pretty high in protein and not very high in fat. This is a moderate to low protein diet, so
this one doesn't have any in it, any protein. But generally, if you are just getting in electrolytes, plenty of electrolytes, you should be fine. A lot of these, BCAAs, they have sucralose in it, they have dextrose in it, they have other forms of
red number 40 in it,
other forms of sugar or sugar substitutes that are poor. So you do want to make sure that if you are having something like this, that you're checking the ingredients and making sure there's no sugar in it or various names of other types of sugar.
And try to keep it dye-free if you can, because there are a number of dyes that are associated with long-term.
Extend is the one I actually looked up because I know that's a popular one on keto. That one actually has sucralose in it, so that is not good at all. That's a poor sugar substitute.
Very poor.
You would be better off doing like
Powerade Zero, honestly.
It has sucralose too. I mean,
does it?
Yeah, one little thing would be fine. But you'd be better off doing some spinach, chocolate MCT powder, some almond milk, and some ice, and blend that up. Or even just doing water, the MCT powder, and some ice, or you don't have to do the ice if you don't want it frozen. And that would be much better. Or even doing like Ultima, like an electrolyte powder would be just as good as doing something like that. That's just my personal opinion. Should you add electrolytes to all your drinking water, or is once a day enough? Once a day to twice a day should be plenty. You don't have to have it with every drink you're taking. You can overdo it. But also you want to make sure that what you're adding to your water is safe. So there's someone asked about Sport Mio. So Mio, Crystal Light, those are ones that use poor sugar substitutes. Those are ones that are going to stall your weight loss, that are going to cause a blood glucose spike. While it may be minimal for those of you that are insulin resistant, that can have a big impact on your weight loss. That's why I said the Ultima one is a pretty good one because there's no artificial sweetener in it at all. What?
Here's a complicated one. I suffer from vasovagal syncope, which means I am prone to fainting. I know what that means. I work in cardiology. I work out often, and one of the things my cardiologist always tells me is keep my salt up. Make sure I have plenty of electrolytes. I noticed since being keto these past 6 months, I've been having dizzy spells, specifically when I'm working out. What's the best way to get in and keep up my electrolytes?
The Ultimate powder I think would be great, having some water with the Ultimate powder in it prior to working out, and then again after working out. Broth. That's another one I use to get in sodium, is chicken broth.
And you can add a good unprocessed butter to it to add some good fats.
Blend it up with a little garlic powder.
You can even toss in a little MCT if you want.
And it's delicious.
I've used that before when I'm like, oh, I need a snack. And she's like, just make a bulletproof broth.
I made it for him once, and he's like, "What? That's gross." And then he had it. And
Well,
he's
no,
like,
I didn't say it was gross. I was like, that's not going to satisfy me. And she makes it. I'm like, oh, it's so good.
Why do you sound like an old lady?
It warms my soul, and it was delicious. So that's a great way to do it because it's a little bit filling, but not overly so. You don't want to feel like you're full before a workout, but it gives you that little bit of a feeling sensation, so you don't feel nauseous after you work out. I find that if I work out on an empty stomach, I feel nauseous afterwards. And then again, it supplements those electrolytes that somebody like yourself really does need to make sure they're being supplemented.
So this is going to be our last question because it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to cut it off. Megan asked, what are some inflammation-fighting keto foods, or is doing keto enough?
You don't fight inflammation, you just don't fuel inflammation.
And keto is an anti-inflammatory diet. It's actually used for that specifically. So doing keto properly will actually help you with the inflammation. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied tonight. Make sure that if you are insulin resistant, if you have PCOS, if you have any endocrine disorders, that you are making sure the sugar substitutes that you are using are okay for you and that aren't causing insulin spikes. So the best thing to do is to test your ketone levels and your blood glucose after having these things to kick those things out, because some of them, anything with malt in it, maltodextrose, maltitol, those ones are bad. Those ones will cause inflammation. Those ones will cause bloat. Those ones can kick you out of ketosis. So you just want to do your best that you can do. Erythritol and monk fruit tend to be safe for most people, but you may have to use a little more moderation than other people if you do have an endocrine disorder, if you are insulin resistant, if you have PCOS. So just keep those things in mind. Everyone is different. Everyone's body responds differently. Some people can do the sweeteners, other people can't. You'll learn as you go what stalls you.
So to answer the question, or is doing keto enough? Yes, it is. But it's got to be done right.
All right, so...
Hold on, there was one more, I'm sorry.
I just said it was done.
I know, there was one more thing. I'm just going to answer real quick. Can you post the recipe for the bulletproof broth? It's a cup of the broth, it's a tablespoon of butter, it's a tablespoon of MCT oil. Depending on the ones you use, the balance may be a little bit different, but it's literally that simple.
And you could
An idiot like myself can make it.
You could do just butter too if you don't have the fat macros or the calories for both.
Yeah.
And then I like to put in a little bit of garlic powder and a little bit of chili powder too to give it a little bit of spice.
Sorry, one more. Red 40 is associated with what? Long term, didn't hear that. There are red dyes associated with thyroid cancer. This was observed in the original red dye used for Swedish fish, which is a shame because my mother and I both absolutely loved Swedish fish. But I guess that's yet another reason not to eat them. So certain dyes are associated with long-term poor outcomes, specifically revolving around cancer. I know the red dyes, I believe it was red dye number 40, is associated with thyroid cancer. So,
all right.
Not that I'm a big conspiracist kind of person, but
that is it. We will call it a night. We do this every Wednesday night, so tune in next week and we will go over other things. I'm going to try and post this one also on Instagram and YouTube for other people that don't have Facebook. So if you've come on later, you can view it again on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. So have a good, oh wait, one more thing. So I just wanted to say the weight loss challenge that I run is starting up in August. You have till August 3rd to sign up. It gives you a 5-week meal plan with a grocery list. It gives you breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack.
It's amazing.
It gives you a support group. It's a private support group.
Just ask Tim about it.
And this is my 7th one. I've been doing them since last year, and it's just a great place to learn how to do keto. I do private Q&As on there. I answer all your questions. I calculate everyone's macros individually. Your meal plan is standard, though it's not specifically for you, but I do teach you how to amend it to meet your needs. So you can sign up for that, and there's also a cash prize. I think it's at $2,700 or $2,800 right now. The last 2 challenges were $4,000. And you split it with one random person. So one person who loses the highest percentage of weight wins half of it, and the other half goes to one person that's randomly selected. You get an entry for every weight you send me and for every pound you lose. So even if you're someone that only loses a couple pounds, you still have a chance to win. So that's it. You have until August 3rd to sign up, and thanks for tuning in. Have a good night, guys.
Good night.